shi baba oh shi baba baba shi baba oh.
From a different bookless cultural center in Toronto, I'm Clifton Joseph, and tonight I'm joined by Anan Xola Lololi, interim executive director of the Afri-Can FoodBasket and a research associate at Ryerson University in the Center for Food Security Studies. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start with the Afri-Can FoodBasket. It's been in operation for over 20 years. Can you give me a compact history of the genesis behind it and how it's come to this point?
Well, the Afri-Can FoodBasket started, I just came out of school. I was studying business at Centennial College, and the first idea come to mind because I play music, and I was thinking about opening a restaurant with music, and the opportunity came up to get some funding to start a program. And I worked at a Big Carrot, and I liked the idea about a food cooperative. And I noticed within the Black community in Toronto, most of the Caribbean community, that we were losing the Caribbean food stores.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized a food buying club might be a good idea to initiate in the community. So the FoodBasket started as a food buying club, a community food buying club, where we purchase food in bulk and we distribute it in the community. What else I noticed also is that many members of the Black community live in low-income communities, and purchasing food from the Caribbean was the most expensive food sold in supermarkets and in food stores.
Because it's more specialized, right?
It's food that travel the food miles. It's not produced in the countryside here, like carrots and beets, and so it coming from Jamaica, it coming from Brazil, some come from Africa, and some come from Latin America, and these foods cost more. So the people who are the lowest income bracket, they buying the most expensive foods. So the idea was to make sure that food could reach within our community at a more reasonable price. So the Food Buying Club was a volunteer-driven, non-profit initiative, so it could serve the community. And got into purchasing the food and being a part of the non-profit institutions looking at food. I realized in our community there was no non-profit that looking at the idea of food in the community. At that time, we didn't have a clue what is food security. We just, and then there was a conference at Ryerson University, and I saw this young man from the Community Food Security Coalition. They were based in California, and he started talking about food security. So, and I listened, and I realized.
Let me cut you. What is food security then? Since
Food security is a mandate that came through the United Nations. And they first started looking at food security after the Second World War, where Europe was in a situation where, no farms. It was just, Second World War was just a lot of death and destruction.
Bombed out fields and craters and shit.
Yeah. So United Nations started to look at Europe, how we can get Europe back on the foot so that, you know, they could start seeing progress. So they started giving food aid. And in the 50s, they started to look to places like Africa and China and India. So the concept of food security is basically making sure communities have access to food that is affordable and healthy. Everyone in the world should have access to food. And in the 80s and 90s, it started being more of a common process of engaging countries that have, like, if there's a flood, or there's fire, like huge forest fire, any natural disaster, you'll find United Nations would respond and make sure there's housing, but there's always food. Or if there's droughts, and so they respond in that way. But this brother came from California. He came with something called community food security. And there's looking more in places like in North America and Europe, whereby you find there to be a neighborhood in a country like Canada that's supposed to be food secure, but some neighborhoods are not food secure because the folks living in this particular neighborhood living in a certain amount of poverty. And you go to a city like Detroit, you can find there's not a system where everyone in the community is food secure. So the whole idea of community food security is making sure that members of this particular community have food that's affordable, and then they put in a component of culturally specific. So you're not only having access to food, but you're having access to food that you like, that is appropriate for your culture. And it's food that is available and it's not through non-emergency sources, like it's not through like a food bank. Now food banks seems to be a part of food security, but before, community food security didn't look at food banks as part of the whole movement, but they thought it would get better, but it gets worse. People still need more food aid, so the concept of food security is basically looking at people having access to fresh, affordable food that's culturally specific.
And of course, the food bank, the African FoodBasket, has been through a number of changes, because in the beginning you started by actually delivering baskets. I guess that's where the basket...
that's the food bank club concept,
so I am a member, and the food is delivered to me. You get it from the farmers. And then you move from that into actually doing community gardens and actually going to the farms.
Yes. 2 years after we started, we did a workshop at this city office right near the Hagamon. You know that
You mean the Hagamon there behind City Hall, baby?
Oh,
that's one of the biggest clubs from back in the day.
Yeah. There's an office just around the corner, and I think it's Chestnut Street.
Yeah, it is Chestnut.
And there was this brother from Ghana who he's a mentor of mine where urban agriculture is concerned. And we had this workshop called Roots to Fruits.
Like the name.
So you had Solomon Boye, he talked about urban agriculture, and then you had this other brother from Uganda. I think his name was Yoga. I can't remember his other name. And he was into environment. And he was basically talking about environment in relation to new migrants. And he made some presentation on environmental programs, and then we had Nene Kofeli. He talked about African-centered programming. And
Chief Nene Kofeli.
That's right, yeah. Chief Nene. And then you had Winston Husbands, who was also involved in food policy, and he was working at Delibate Food Bank. So you had these four brilliant minds came up with the vision and the focus that the food basket should go in. And it's just that organic. It was a training program, but the focus and the direction the food basket should go in came through that experience. And what it set the tone of where we need to go. Environment, organic food production, Then you had Salman Boye, urban agriculture. And then you had Winston Husband, who talk about food policy. And then you had Nene, the chief, Kafeli. He talked about how to steer the institution to be African-centered. That has been the foundation of, we do things from looking at being an African-centered institution, looking at the lens of the history of the people of African descent.
And then you moved to community gardens and you moved to the farms, right?
Yes.
How was that experience? Because now you're actually becoming farmers. Instead of buying the food from the farms, you're actually now producing the food yourself.
Yes. Well,
you had to learn. You had to learn stuff.
Well, for me, I learned by reading and I learned by experience because I never studied agriculture. I never. I got a lot of workshops. I learned from a lot of conferences, and I made learning about agriculture intentional. Now, at times because we involve in cooking programs, we were involved in urban agriculture. When I say urban agriculture, we're talking about community gardens, community garden animation. Community garden animation is about going to communities and helping them to establish a community garden program in their community, whether it be at a building, at a church, or a school. So we learn how to engage community to establish these gardens. We work with members like yourself who had backyards, and we had some of the people who were purchasing the food basket. We work with them to establish backyard gardens. We work with schools, we work with the African-centered school to set up school garden programs. And so from community gardens, backyard gardens, around 2007, I think they call it the year of the gun.
Yeah, that was when we had the highest number of death by homicide, by guns.
No, I don't think that was it. It's when they killed the young white girl.
Oh,
her name is Jennifer Krieber. They were killing a lot of black youths, but no real funds come to really look at them. It was a different situation, and they say, you know what, we gotta start making sure we're rearing these young people. So they had some funding, so we could start training some young youths within the African Canadian community, and that really sent the food basket in a different direction because we had the opportunity now to really, because we were at Black Creek Farm. Black Creek Farm had just started. Solomon Boye, he negotiated with Toronto Region Conservation Authority. We have access. The city got access to Black Creek. We were one of the first partners at Black Creek because the Black Creek Farm was in the black community, and Jane and Finch, and we wanted to make sure that we engage the young people in that community to look at not so much farming and gardening, but youth leadership. But we did it through food security programs, community food security programs. So basically, it's learn them about community food security, learn them about leadership development, learn them about their history, an African-centered perspective. Because we had some, like I said, we had the best. We had Nene Kafeli and my good sister, Joanne Atterley, and they set the tone of where the food basket should go, engaging young people. They gave us the opportunity to get into urban farming because we got the funding to engage the young people in the summer, and we were able to engage young professionals to look at urban farming. So we were at Black Creek, and then we were at McVean Farm in Brampton. There was an incubator farm program from this group called Farm Start. That got me going.
So how many youth were you dealing with at this point?
At that time, we were dealing with 2007, we were doing 25 youths, 2007, 25 youths, 2008, 25 youths, 2009, and the numbers had been fluctuating over the years. Yeah, and it was. I think that was the great days of programming for the African food basket.
So what were they learning? What were they learning at the farm?
Well, they were learning, basically they were learning like what is food security. And they were learning about the food system. the local food system. Basically, where food comes from, how a farm is established, how you produce the food, how you transform the food. For instance, if you plant in peanuts, you plant peanuts, plant the seeds, you look after the crop, you harvest the peanuts, you take it to a factory, you transform it, then you could take it to a warehouse. And from the warehouse, you take it to a supermarket or you take it to a retail store. You come to the store, you buy the peanuts, you consume it. And if you look from production, transformation, transportation, retail, and you purchase it, it's a whole closed loop situation, because you can take the peanuts now, you eat it, or for instance peanut butter, you consume the peanuts, you have the bottle, you recycle the bottle. So there's a whole loop, a closed loop. So basically the food system is about production, transformation, retail, and we try to make sure we tell them about the food system as a sustainable food system. I mean, you want to make sure that you're using organic methods of production. I mean, you're not using any chemical fertilizers, or you're not using any chemical pesticides. You want to make sure the whole process is a holistic process, because we want to make sure that when we're farming, we're not farming and we have the water polluted with the chemical fertilizers and the pesticides. So the whole idea is for them to get a perspective, because growing up in apartment buildings in Jane and Finch, Malvern, Jamestown, it's hard for them to get the opportunity to see where food comes from. So to me, it was such an interesting experience to work with them. We take them in the countryside to farms, and they'd go out in the countryside and they would just love it.
Because I tell you, I came down to the McVean farm a couple of times, and it was away from the highway.
Yes,
and time either seems to just stop, move very slowly, or just like metamorphosize into this kind of thing. And it was such a peaceful experience. And you're there with the earth, your hands are dirty with dirt and so on. It was a brilliant and transformative experience.
It was a transformative experience. Like some of the young people, when they testify, it's like, it makes me feel so good. There's one sister, her name is Hibak Gel. And she told me a story. She said, at first it looked challenging, but when they get the rhythm of using the equipment, she said sometimes she would be in the field, and then she'd get a chance to meditate. She'd be working, and you never get a chance to be in an environment where you could. It's just, as I say, in the countryside, it's just skies and forests and field.
Birds tweeting.
And you're in your own meditation. And to tell you the truth, personally, it happened to me in the garden. Sometimes I'm in the backyard of a garden. And I just, it is a real, it is transport you to somewhere else, where you're in your own little world, thinking, but at the same time, you're doing what you have to do. But, so when she told me about her experience, and everyone have a different take on what they experience.
And of course, too, when they reap their first crops, that must be a hell of an experience.
That's a wonderful experience to see them actually eating tomatoes from the plants. But my best experience is working with kids, young children. Young children and growing food, especially from low-income communities, is like magic for them. It's like magic to see a worm coming out of the soil, you know what I mean? Some of them would be very scared, but some of them would just pick it up, and like, these are the ones that are real brave, and you know what I mean? And those are the experiences you can't get in a high-rise building,
So there's so many terms you got to get through, Zola, and food justice, food security, food sovereignty. Can you quickly go through those there? Because the terms seem to be moving every couple of years.
Yeah. The the initial term that is used in the food movement was food security. That one come from the
Access to fresh food,
yeah,
healthy
that's
food.
from the United Nations. But community food security evolved out of, to my knowledge, out of the Community Food Security Coalition, because they started to break it down. Other than because when you hear the word food security, it's like the government, the federal government talking about food security and the provincial government, but community food security would come as a term used mostly by non-profit organizations. We're involved in community food security. And from community food security, I think pretty close the idea of food sovereignty evolved. And the good thing about food sovereignty is that it's not something from the western part of the world. This came out of Latin America and Africa, where farmers and folks involved in food production in these areas started looking at the sovereignty of food and how communities in these places could look at food in a more localized perspective, in the production, in the selling. So it's I would say, is anti-cooperation food systems development, where the farmers and the people who produce the food are the people who would benefit more from what food sovereignty have to offer. A good example is I would say people of African descent are very food insecure in many places. As example, in a city like Detroit, where there's over 80%, 85% people of African descent, there's a lot of food insecurity. And if you look in places, I would say in Toronto, people of African descent are very food insecure.
Well, even in Regent Park here, one of the biggest housing projects, that until recently when they did the redevelopment, there were no supermarkets in that general neighborhood.
Yeah, but even when there's supermarkets, if as a people we don't produce, we don't sell, we don't write, we don't teach, in being food sovereign, you have to reign over food. You have to be able to produce, you have to be able to sell, you know. So we need to be more proactive in how we view food, not because it's available, because food could be available.
There's a lot of cheap food out there.
Yeah, food. Like for instance, I always say that your parents who give you food. As long as you could remember, you know, well, I get food, I go home. Mommy have food for me, because you know, either mommy buy the food or daddy buy the food. So, in our community, we don't produce food, okay? You hardly see a black supermarket in Ontario. You see a few food stores. You hardly know black farmers. Now, we live in this country 1600s.
1608, 1604, they say.
And if you ask where a black farming community is, if you ask somebody who's Dutch, we're a Dutch farming community, they didn't call a town in Ontario for you. Okay?
Chatham.
You know? But it's hard for us to identify a large black farming community. But we're here for a while now. You're talking about food studies, you know what I mean? Where are these black farmers? What happened to these farms? We're not, you don't see our history in food systems in this country. For a long time, a lot of people think like African descent come in the 1950s. There's people from the Caribbean who come in the 1950s. You're talking about the, what's the term you use for the sisters who come and look after?
Nannies.
That's right. But we were here long before that. We were here for a long time. Actually, there's a conference, there's a black conference that happened in Ottawa a couple of years ago. And then I realized the only place that black folks have land to farm is in Nova Scotia. We have lots of land. Because you know that there's communities in those areas.
Well, look, even, man, in Barry, Urania,
Right.
that area up there, a bunch of black folks from Cincinnati bought a bunch of land up there, and the government had given a lot of land to the black colored corps who beat off the Americans in the War 1812.
Yeah.
And up until 1949, black folks owned a whole stretch of that area up around Barry. And they
Yes.
just got bought out, and then the government started bringing European immigrants to dilute them and bought out a lot of black folks in that area up to 1949. If you go up there, there still are a lot of plaques around. You have to search for them. A lot of plaques there that black folks
You
were.
see, you're talking about plaques, but we should have, there's a village. I know a sister, her name is Aita Sadu, who wrote a book about something with Ororo. I can't remember exactly what it is, but she was talking about villages up in that area. Now, is there any history of the farms up in that area? They gotta be living in farms.
Not that I know of, no.
And so there need to be food studies on the African experience in this country.
True.
Because one thing I know about studying about food is that when Europeans come to colonize these places, they were a church, and there was a farm, and there's a government buildings. These are the oldest institutions you would see in any community. There's always a church, there's always a farm. Farm gotta be there, because, you know, and then there's always a government building. Okay? And there might be a school.
And a tavern.
And a tavern. So in our community now, you don't see this happening. You know, we're the farms, because even if we live in Aurora or these places, these villages in Barry, you know, it's good to have a historical perspective of, you know. I heard there's some controversy of Nigger Creek.
Yeah. There was that. There a lot of niggers around. I mean, a lot of nigger areas in the country that people have been trying to maintain or others want to change.
Yeah.
But let's shift for a moment, because you know, let's talk about culture. Because you know, we hold on as black folks in the West. We were foods insecure during that whole set of periods when we were captured and all of that, right? So you had whatever scraps was left, and that became our soul food.
Yeah.
Right? We love our fried food, we love our pork, we love our ham hocks, we love our this and that, so that, and sometimes, a lot of times, those foods are detrimental to us. What is the relationship between culture and how much of our culture sometimes we have to drop in order for health and for food security and food justice and sovereignty?
Well, soul food, we don't necessarily have to drop. Some of it we have to drop, but we don't. You see, we need to look.
You drop pork.
Well, let's look at it holistically. The way food was produced, what we call soul food, it was produced differently in that time. Even pork, even chickens, the way the food was produced, and then we still like. I'm reading this book about from this brother named Twitty, this black food historian, and he's shining me to a lot of knowledge about the food ways of the African American experience. Now, in African people, African descent culture, you can find the different food ways we do. Like for instance, even in the Caribbean, we eat pigtail and we eat sour beef. You know, there's always a saying about when I don't want to use the word nannies, but there's a more appropriate word for the sisters who came from the Caribbean.
Caregivers.
Caregivers, they look after the kids. They came up here and they were going to food stores and they were giving away chicken foot. They were giving away pigtail because the white folks, you know, they don't use.
Didn't know what to do with it.
They
They
didn't
didn't deal with it.
And then these sisters start asking for it because they didn't know the value of it with the food they cook. Like I originally from Guyana, and there's a dish called cook up. Cook up is peas and rice with coconut milk and seasoning. But the
Very
real
healthy. No meat?
The real it have meat. Okay. They used to put pigtail and salt beef in it.
Of course.
And when you eat that cook up, it's like, now,
Divine.
for me now, as a Rasta man, we cook ital versions. And trust me, there's some Rastas who can cook some ital versions that can be just as delicious.
Have a pork taste to it?
I don't know if it's a pork taste, but it have the quality taste. Man, I got some, especially these brothers in Ghana. They're like, anyway, the whole idea of soul food is the modern version of soul food was because like I can remember you talk about when we had the forum. You talk about the jerk food, whereby instead of they giving you a proper salad, they just give you some iceberg lettuce, and they don't value salad.
The big question I asked you at West Indian restaurant, you want coleslaw with that?
Yeah, and basically there's much more than coleslaw. Coleslaw is good, but there's this arugula, mixed greens, you know, and it's for us to learn. Like, this is one thing I like about Toronto and the foodways in Toronto is that you have all different types of culture. So you know, and so the other thing too about for instance, the jerk restaurants. So could those restaurants seem to represent people of African descent from the Caribbean? That's supposed to be our version of restaurants. Because everybody now doing the jerk.
Of course.
You know what I mean? But the jerk is the Buccaneer food. You know what I mean? And it comes from Jamaica, and as you said, you're going to have fried chicken, might be some fried meat, and then you're going to have coleslaw and
a mountain of rice.
So what's the vegetables? Now, if you look,
slice of tomato.
Now, they're in trouble because you see the Canadian government yesterday released the new food guide. And
no dairy, no meat?
No dairy, a little bit of dairy, a little bit of meat. So now, if people are going to eat food in a healthy way now, they're supposed to follow the food guide. But it's a contradiction with these Caribbean restaurants. Now, if you look, as people of African descent, we got to learn from each other. You go to the Ethiopian restaurant now, and you order food, and you're gonna have a little bit of meat, you have your greens, you have your lentils, you know, and then you have your injera. It's a wholesome, nutritious package, okay? You don't want to go into a restaurant and it's one big piece of meat, you know what I mean? And even a lot of the African restaurants, we got to look at health and nutrition. We got to eat to be healthy, because cardiovascular disease, diabetes, we got to make sure we eating food that prevent sickness. Because you're eating for your health now, you know what I mean? And the other thing too is that how these foods are produced, you know, with hormones for the chickens, hormones for the cows, you know what I mean? They mean that if the cow is being injected with the hormones in the milk, is contaminated. The government have onto something with this new food guide, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not to cut you, remember, but time is ticking away. I'm going to have to bring you back another time. But there's a couple of things I wanted to deal with before we go. One is some of the drawbacks behind. I know with the farm where you had a lot of community groups coming in and have their plot of land and so on, a lot of food was produced. People gave it to their collectives, to the food banks, to old folks' homes and so on. And then there was a question of distribution. How difficult has been distribution of the food? Because I know you distribute to a number of the restaurants and so on around town, and you sell at a number of the food, the farmers markets.
Yeah. I would say 2-3 years ago, we were more productive in the production system. If we're talking about the last season was more, I would say, service programs, in the sense that we engage new farmers like yourself in getting the opportunity. We engage young people to come and farm, and then we engage the seniors in their garden program.
But go back to the boom period.
The boom period.
Where there was a lot of food produced.
We were doing 4 farmers markets. And we had what we call... Weekly, yeah. 4 farmers market weekly. And then we had, at one time, we had 20 farmers who we were training to become farmers. And we had a lot of young urban professionals who just wanted to see what the experience was. But then we had some folks who really got into farming gonna be their life. Like our brother
As
Bill.
Ishitra.
Yeah. So selling to the farmers market was you could survive off of selling for the farmers market. Last year we were able to distribute vegetables to at least 4 restaurants. So the idea now is to look and see how we could, as for the food basket, we do sell food as a social enterprise. But we encourage people like yourself and people who want to get into farming, the whole process of growing the food, harvesting, and then marketing the food to restaurants and farmers market. So our work is more to facilitate the development within our community. We want to see members of our community more productive and be more part of the whole food system, especially the sustainable food system. I mean, growing food organically, so that our community, you know, we could say, well, in Barry they're black farmers, you know. As coming back to the history, we want to make sure that we could see our farming community. We could see young people leaving school and studying about farming and being involved in the food system. So selling to restaurants, you know, I mean, we were selling to several restaurants and they're appreciating what we were selling because we produced some of the best callaloo in the whole, probably the whole province this year, man.
That is your signature property.
Tell
the audience about how you discovered that the farmers in Ontario didn't know what to do with callaloo. They used to serve it to their pigs?
The farmers, the white farmers in Ontario, they call callaloo pigweed. Now, callaloo is from the amaranth family, so there's several varieties. The one that we sell is the one from Jamaica, and that is a variety that I would say they breed. They didn't genetically modify it, but they breed. They make sure that they cultivate it in a way where it come out a certain. This is a particular kind of variety, but there's a variety of callaloo that grows here that Canadian farmers feed to pigs, because pigs like the amaranth plant, you know. And for me, I was surprised when we tell Ontario farmers about callaloo, and they say, "What's callaloo?" I said, "No, we feed that." But we were selling callaloo at the market, and then these same organic farmers that sell around us, they said, where that stuff grow on my farm, and I take it, and they start selling it now, you know? and it's a good thing because we're talking about food miles, and for instance, a bunch of callaloo is like $3-4 a pound, okay? Callaloo grow wild here.
I'm telling you.
You could get callaloo for like $2 a pound,
you can't stop
$1.50 a
them
pound.
things from growing.
But I could safely say the Afri-Can FoodBasket has done a lot of work promoting specifically callaloo growth.
Absolutely.
And
Take 5 in that.
The price is going down right now because lots more people are growing it in the backyard. Lots more farmers are now starting to grow it. Like we go callaloo this year, and trust me, organic,
high.
6-7 foot,
Wow.
and the leaves as large. A lot of people think it's chemically grown, but it's organic.
We got to do a whole program on callaloo. Can you tell the folks how they can get in touch with you, all your details, your phone numbers,
Yes,
websites?
well, folks want to get in touch
media.
with the Afri-Can FoodBasket could get us at info@africanfoodbasket.ca, or they could go on the website www.africanfoodbasket.ca and look on the website and see what we're doing. They could get us on Facebook, we're on Instagram, they get us on Twitter, at Afri-Can FoodBasket. The easiest way is to get us at info@africanfoodbasket.ca.
I'm Clifton Joseph. Our guest here tonight was Anan Xola Lololi, and we are coming live from a different booklist cultural center in Toronto. Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks for being here.